Hi everyone. This is the PowerShell virtual PowerShell user group, and I am completely thrown off because Chrome just crashed while I was in the middle of doing this intro.
Nothing to worry about.
And now it's not liking the Chromecast thing in Firefox. This is why I wasn't in Firefox originally, because it was the alpha version. I'm going to try opening Chrome again. Anyway, I am just here to introduce Kirk Munro and ask him to tell us a little bit about himself before he starts with the presentation.
Sure. Thanks, Joel. Hi, everyone. For people who, most people in the PowerShell community online know me via my handle, which is Poshaholic. I've been working with PowerShell for 9+ I think years now, something like that, since before it was version 1, when it was back in the Monad days. I used to be a developer. Well, all my career I've been a developer, but I used to be focused on doing a lot of C++ development, working in the protocol layer with LDAP and MAPI and those APIs. And yeah, just switching from one API to another and trying to get my head around the mental model of the authors of those APIs was an interesting experience that I was happy to find greatly improved in Windows PowerShell, when Windows PowerShell was being advertised back in the days of Exchange 12 under the name of Monad. And so they showed this new API and or the scripting language, and talked about the consistency and how I could even make intelligent guesses and be right. And so, which I couldn't do with MAPI and LDAP so much until I got deep into it. And so I decided that I wanted to kind of redirect my career over this and see where it went. And here I am 9 years later, still working in PowerShell. So it turned out to be a pretty fruitful experience. So at any rate, I've been product architect and then product manager for PowerGUI in the past, if you're familiar with that, script editing environment, as well as administration console. And then that was back when I used to work for Quest. I've also been product manager for PowerWF, and these days I work as product manager for a company that doesn't have any PowerShell specific products, but we do a lot of stuff with PowerShell internally anyway, and that company is Provence Technologies. We do IT asset management, and I am the go-to guy for anything related to automation and PowerShell internally, and helping customers with their automation needs using our product, and driving some of the product from a technical level, and spending most of my time still working on PowerShell inside of this other organization. So that's a bit about me. And Joel invited me on here to talk about, well, he gave me my pick of topics. And so when I'm going through working in PowerShell, rather than put out a whole lot of little sound bites about interesting little things you can do, I tend to go deep on technologies and on features in PowerShell, because I want to see what's down the rabbit hole and where they go and what you can do with stuff that other people haven't done before. And so an interesting thing that I've been working with lately that I wanted to share is the notion of domain-specific languages in PowerShell, and features that are in PowerShell that make that possible, sort of, and what I've kind of done to wrap that up and share that as a module that just got published about 20 minutes ago on GitHub in version 0.9. And that's what you should see on your screen right now. So, so I created this module called LanguagePx. All the modules, if you're wondering about the PX part, all the modules I create these days have PX as a suffix. That's better. So, yeah, I put PX as a suffix because it's Well, it kind of reminds me of remedies, RX, from prescriptions, and most of these are remedies for various problems I find in PowerShell. Plus, it just gives me a consistent branding across the modules I work on. So, PowerShell version 4 came out with this interesting yet little known feature called dynamic keyword support. And dynamic keywords are very poorly documented right now on any MSDN documentation. And if you ask the PowerShell team directly about them and how to get them to work, the best reply I've gotten is that they're only half-baked. And so we're not going to show you how to make them work because they're only half-baked so far. And that point being that they want to have flexibility to be able to change them going forward, because there's some challenges when you work with them, and they want to be able to change that without risking breaking code. So for now, they haven't been documenting them. But yet, dynamic keywords give you the capability of creating rich domain-specific language extensions on top of PowerShell that you can do cool things with. And for those people who don't know, when you're talking about a domain-specific language, or domain-specific vocabulary for that matter, because people kind of flip back and forth between the two, depending on the context, it's basically a subset of commands that exist inside of another programming language that are specific to a domain or an area of functionality, and that make that functionality a lot easier. And the most common example of that you'll see in PowerShell is desired state configuration, PowerShell DSC, which is getting quite well known these days. It's a domain-specific language that allows you to easily deploy configuration to server systems, and then to maintain that configuration state over time. So, and DSC is actually based on this domain-specific, or this dynamic keyword functionality. So they're leveraging it internally. They just, like I said, haven't documented it and opened it up to the whole world. And so I kind of started doing that through LanguagePx. So let me give you a bit of a background of what domain-specific language stuff looks like. Let me just change my font size here so it's a bit more readable. By the way, for technical presentations like these, I generally shy away from slides and go just for content, because it's all mostly just me in a command line showing off the functionality. And since I'm working with a lot of new content here, it didn't make much sense to me. I'm still kind of putting some pieces together to wrap it up on a slide deck just yet. But I'm still working on documenting some of the things I've figured out and putting that in a usable format for some people over time. So it's a work in progress. So let me get to a clean slate. Joel, is the font size in that decent?
What's that?
Is the font size in my PowerShell window readable?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. So inside of Windows PowerShell, in the System Management Automation namespace, there's a language namespace that contains a set of classes under the dynamic star prefix. So there's dynamic keyword, keyword body mode, name mode, parameter, and property, and that's it. And so these classes, there's 5 classes, are designed to allow you to create the notion of a dynamic keyword. When you think of a keyword in PowerShell, you think of the if statement or the switch statement. I mean, those are keywords in PowerShell today. Class in version 5 gives you PowerShell classes. So these keywords are not really commands. They're almost a bit of a higher level above commands that give you access to this specific functionality to work with PowerShell more at a language level. And so you can create keywords. Actually, just by I'm just going to do new keyword equals new object name. So there's no parameters required for it. No, the constructor doesn't need any arguments. And so you can create a keyword just by invoking this new object with this particular class. And then there's a whole bunch of properties on these objects, but as indicated, it's not documented how this stuff works. And so through a lot of trial and error, I've gone through and basically enabled a certain property, set it to a certain value, tried something, looked at some code using ILSpy to kind of see how things work internally and just read code and understand stuff and figure out how the stuff works. And so keywords are interesting because there's 3 types of keywords that you can create, which is specified using this body mode parameter. And so there's command keywords, there's hash table keywords, and there's, it's escaping me, wait. Body mode, command, hash table, and script block, right? So those are the 3 types of keywords. And the way those break down is command keywords basically are what you would use if you want to define a keyword that under the covers generates some AST that is then used to execute. Yeah.
I have a request to go even larger with your font.
Okay. I don't know that I can, but I'm going to try.
You should totally use ConMU for this stuff.
Yeah, you know I should. Okay, hang on.
I always use it when I present, just for that reason. But I actually tend to use it all the time once I got going.
Okay, so 1 second.
Mouse wheel.
Yeah.
And that way you can resize too.
Yeah.
Beauty.
Yeah. So,
might go a little bigger, because that's about the same size you had it before.
Yeah. Better?
Beauty.
Okay. And I hit enter on that. Why isn't it working? So, that should have just worked. You know what? Is there something obvious I'm missing, Joel, that you can tell?
What happened? Is it not working?
No, I know why, though. There, I just opened up a new tab. Let's do it that way. There, I know it'll work. Okay. There. So, get rid of this other one. Back to where it was. So yeah, so this namespace, right? So there's 3 different types of keywords. There's command keywords, there are hash table keywords, and there are script block keywords. Command keywords, under the covers, are translated into AST, or an abstract syntax tree. Abstract syntax trees in PowerShell define how or what is the makeup of a particular script or script block or command, so that PowerShell can then know what to do with that. So if I create a script block called foo, I can look at the abstract syntax tree, and I can start browsing through this and see what that looks like. And you can so command keywords basically are used to translate between something simple, like if statement, for example, is a good example of something that could be a command keyword, and then translate that into actually command that does some stuff that you generate using an abstract syntax tree. In practice, and in this LanguagePx module, I'm not using command keywords. I'm only using the other 2. So the other 2 that are interesting are the hash table keyword and the script block keyword. And what those look like, I might as well just go directly into my lab environment and show you. 1 minute. Okay. So there are 2 examples of hash table keyword syntax, or yeah, 2 examples in here. There's hash table keyword syntax, and there is script block syntax. And oh, that's the wrong one. Sorry, I've got too many files open, and so I actually need to open up the file here. Can you still see my virtual desktop, by the way?
Yes.
Okay, great. I know I should do something else, but I'll just throw this in Notepad for now. So, so this is what a hash table keyword syntax looks like. This properties keyword, and basically it's just a keyword with or without a name. So this is the name of the keyword itself. Excuse me. It may have a name here, or it might not, depending on how you define it. And then it's going to a hash table without the hash table syntax that allows you to define a bunch of properties. And these look just like hash tables that we're all familiar with in PowerShell. So they're a bunch of key value pairs. And so this is one of the type of keywords that you can create, and this is one of the ones that you'll see in use a lot inside of PowerShell DSC. And then another keyword that you can create is a script block keyword, and that's what you see here at the outside of my example. So I've got management pack configuration, and then I've got this name, and then there is a script block, and this is just a series of commands that I run. So a script block keyword can contain commands, and it can contain other keywords. And the point being that if you look at PowerShell DSC and you look at the implementation details, this is the kind of thing that you see. You'll see node, and then you'll see a node name, and then the script block of what that does, and inside then you'll see breakdowns of various configuration information along with properties with key value pairs that are separated by equal signs, just like a hash table. And so it's using those two concepts together to create a domain-specific language. So when you're, what you can do in PowerShell version 4, since that's where this was all added, is you can create these one-off keywords, and you can create keywords that then internally allow you to invoke other keywords, and that all works great. And so I've done this myself. I've gone through in Creative Script and put this all together and ran it, and it's working fine. Until you run some configuration command, configuration commands from PowerShell desired state configuration. Because at the moment, if you run a configuration command inside of PowerShell, internally, it will take the entire keyword table and nuke it. It'll clear it out. And that's part of DSC management, but it's got some issues with it, which goes to the whole concept of this being half-baked. And so,
sorry, you seen the whole keyword table? Yeah.
Whenever you invoke any configuration command, the whole keyword table is nuked, and then internally it creates its own keywords, and then it runs those. And so it doesn't play nicely with existing dynamic keywords, and that makes it difficult for people to get any value out of them. However, it doesn't mean that you can't get the value out of them. So what I've done inside of this module, I have this module called LanguagePx. It's available right now on GitHub under, and I'll paste this in the chat window as well in case we want the link, under github.com /Kirk Munro /LanguagePx. So there's a link in the chat window, and so if you click on that link, you can go and download this module, and this module does a better job than what's native to PowerShell version 4 in terms of managing keywords. It internally creates its own table. Any keywords that are created through this module are stored in that table, rather than pretending that they're going to be around in memory forever, which they're not because of the current issues that are in the implementation with desired state configuration. It'll create the keywords, store them in its own table, and then the moment that you're going to invoke, it'll pull those keywords into the current keyword table and then run them. And then afterwards, it doesn't matter if they're taken out again, because anytime it needs them, it pulls them back in on top. So it'll give some built-in keyword management to enable the creation of vocabularies or commands that allow you to do cool things. And when you're trying to think of, like, well, where would I want to use this? How would I want to leverage a domain-specific language in which is PowerShell? There are, I mean, DSC is a great example, but there are other examples out there of where you might want to leverage a DSL and where it makes more sense than going the traditional route of using commandlets or functions instead of a PowerShell module. So if I flip over to my my environment here, I'll show you a few examples of what I'm talking about. One of them, actually, let me jump into my test lab. So I've got this module called SCSM MPC PX. So it's a long name. Don't really like it. I haven't really figured out how I want to call it instead, what I want to use instead for the name. But what it does is, if you ever work with a product like SCSM, System Center Service Manager, or well, any System Center product that has extensibility, so Ops Manager, they also take management packs, or ConfigMan, they have an extensibility model. If you look at the extensions that you can create for those things, those extensions, the architecture is absolutely targeted for the developer, not for the IT pro, because it leverages creating and compiling DLLs using Windows workflow, XAML files mixed in with C# and XML files, and it's really a complicated process. And it's also a frail process when you're not careful, because one mistake in an XML file can prevent your management pack from working properly if you create a management pack, for example, for these products. They have very rich APIs, and these rich APIs allow you to create very powerful extensions, and that's part of what we do at my work at Provence. So we create very powerful extensions for System Center products, like Service Manager. But there are a lot of business needs from customers of these platforms, of these products, to create simple extensions that just add some small feature to make life easier for them. But it's a big hurdle that usually either means consulting dollars or buying a third-party product, because if it's not even inside the product itself, and the product team, it's not high enough in their priority to do, but you have the business need for it, you either build it yourself, hire a consultant, or buy it. And all those options are expensive and not appealing to these customers of these platforms. So I work within this product, and I get the need for both scenarios, right? You have the need for creating rich extensions that leverage a lot of rich functionality where you need the full API, and you want to be able to roll up your sleeves and work on workflow and create these DLLs to do the job. But you also have the simple cases. And so in the simple cases, I feel like there's an opportunity to bring this down to bring it down a level, to basically abstract away from all of that complexity and to expose what would look like a mini language in PowerShell, much like desired state configuration. So, 1 second, because I don't like that this is not. Yeah, I don't like that was not showing me the file with code with syntax highlighting. So, whoops. There. So let me get out of this. So this is an example of a domain-specific language created for the purpose of generating management packs that you can then load into Service Manager. And it's much more declarative than what you would normally get inside of Service Manager using their API. So I defined this management pack configuration keyword and inside my language, and then that keyword takes a name. So this is the name of the management pack configuration file. So in this case, and we use this for a free product that we developed at work and that we give away for free. So a common need inside of System Center Service Manager is automatic closure of work items like incidents and problems that have just been accidentally left open by the operator the last time that he touched them. So you work on an incident that somebody reports something, you figure out what the problem is, you mark it as resolved, and then you forget about it. You don't bring it into the closed state. But these things, just for management purposes, need to be closed so that the system can properly track them all the way through from creation to closure, and you can make sure that you're measuring properly how fast is your organization closing these tickets, these incidents that customers are opening up, internal or external. But automatic closure is not in the product. And so the solution for that is to create a management pack. And there are a bunch of free solutions out there for that now, ours being one of them. A few years ago, when I worked for PowerWF, we had a product, well, the product PowerWF, that enabled you to create things like this as well. That product cost north of 2,500 US to buy. If you bought with a full System Center bundle, it was 3,500 US, and customers would come to us and buy that product for this specific feature, for the auto-close feature, because it was that much of a pain point, and this was less expensive for them to spend $3,500 than to develop themselves or hire a consultant to do. So that kind of thing shouldn't be necessary, and this makes that necessity go away and become a lot easier. And so if you read through this document, which describes the it contains the language and describes the management pack, all I'm doing is I'm defining a bunch of properties of my management pack. You know, who created it and what's the display name and the copyright date, and you can see it's declarative, but it can contain PowerShell. So I'm using, you know, double-coded strings and embedding the copyright year so that whenever I run this and I build it, it builds it with the current year, and I can update the version number. And then a bunch of options, such as I got to indicate where I wanted to output my files, and is there an icon for the particular management pack? And because these deal with files that are signed and use strong name keys to create the actual management pack bundles behind the scenes, I need to give you some details of where those things are. And so this is just some build options, some properties, and then I get into what the management pack actually does. And normally this would require. Yeah.
Can you, while you're talking about the actual syntax here, is all that strongly typed? Are all those names IntelliSense and so on?
Oh, no. So if I there's more options on here I think I haven't specified. So if I come down here and hit Control Space, yeah, I get nothing. If I actually let me do it this way. Well, because they're not, because it's not really loaded, right? Because I'm loading it on the fly because of that issue with keywords not being persisted properly and being totally taken out by running a configuration, then those keywords don't really exist inside of PowerShell until I run this command. So I can't really generate.
Is there any way to fix that?
I'm not 100% sure.
How about if I ask this a different way? What's the benefit of using dynamic keywords versus just writing a function that takes a script block or a hash table?
To do all this work, you mean?
Yeah, well, I mean, properties right there could be a function that takes a hash table, right?
Sure.
And the only difference in syntax to what you have right now is you need an @ sign at the front of your braces.
Yeah, you're right.
The question is, in DSC, the reason why they opted to not do that is basically, or seems to me, as a skeptic, seems to me the main reason they opted to not do that is to get IntelliSense, because obviously if it's just a hash table, it's just a hash table. But with this, you have a set list of values that are allowed, right? Just like they were parameters.
Yeah, but I don't think it's just about the IntelliSense. For me, it's more about separation from partial to full separation of declaration from implementation. At least that's how I'm looking at it with the DSLs I'm creating. So, because if you look at this, right, I mean, so I got this management pack configuration doc, and I'm declaring what this management pack looks like. And all I'm doing is setting a whole bunch of properties. But there's no code behind this, right? There's where's the code that actually runs these things? I haven't declared functions, and so how does this actually work? And so the way it works is because the way this, like normally, if I'm going to use this using functions, like you mentioned, you know, I'd have to do $prop equals.
No. So that have you ever looked at Show UI?
Yes.
So Show UI has the same sort of syntax, except that you would be required, depending on the well, in this example, probably what you would be required to do is, because essentially what you have is a whole bunch of nested hash tables, all of your curly braces need @ signs in front of them, and the ones like properties just needs equals.
Yeah, okay, I get what you're saying now. Yeah, yeah.
So it's not a whole lot of syntax difference, but the big difference for show UI is that if I wrote it like that, you wouldn't get any IntelliSense. With show UI, we opted to use parameters rather than loose hash tables, just because you would get some IntelliSense, right? Although I must admit that with show UI, the IntelliSense is not very helpful because every single thing that you're making has 100 or 200 properties that you can set, right? But it's still there, and once you type in, copyright, it tells you that the value needs to be a string, not a date.
Right.
And stuff like that. Is that you?
That's my phone. Yeah, I'm trying to mute here.
Stuff like that is useful, and that's what I was thinking. Like the big benefit of doing it this way would be, obviously the other one that I wrote was the XML DSL, and it's a little bit more like this, where I actually wrote a script block, and then properties was a command, but it's only exposed inside of my command, so it's, you know what I mean? Like,
yes,
I take the output of that and I bind them all together somehow, magic.
Yeah, and I've done that before, and I did that a long time ago with a Visio DSL I created. Did I ever show that to you? So I created a Visio DSL that allowed me to basically just, it was all a bunch of functions, and inside of functions I was defining other functions and all of that. So part of the challenge I found with that, I found a number of challenges. One of them was dealing with command visibility, which commands I wanted to be visible where. And I know that I could force certain commands to be visible in certain places and others not, but then I found when I was doing that manipulation that it was slowing down the execution of the script, and so I felt like I was trying to do what I'm really doing here, which is more of a language feature that allows you to do it, but forcing it in with functions and some voodoo magic to make the things work behind the scenes.
Right. So could this be tweaked so that maybe I'm just spitballing, but that management pack configuration is going to define the DSC, the syntax, right?
Yes.
So could you run that command and define it all, and then it would stick until, meaning it would stick for my ISE IntelliSense or whatever, at least until somebody deleted it.
Yeah, possibly, and maybe part of the reason why this isn't working inside of mine is the implementation as well. And so I know when I was talking with Jason Shirk from the PowerShell team about this particular feature and the work I was doing on it. Behind the scenes for any of these, like I mentioned with the command, with the dynamic keywords that have a body mode of type command, which are the ones that I'm not using yet, you can have those return AST. Well, you can return AST technically with any of these. Like I could have implemented these so that behind the scenes I return AST. I think if I'm returning AST, I think that's the key that is needed for keyword support for PowerShell to start picking up on it, because then they can parse and figure out what is next and what's available. But I didn't do that at first for two reasons. One, simplicity. I wanted to implement the body of this quickly, and I had already worked out the logic as a regular PowerShell script without dealing with AST. And two, AST is really complicated when you're first getting into it. I've spent the last 2 months working on another module that heavily leverages AST, and so now my comprehension of AST is good enough that I could behind the scenes go and use these to generate AST and return that and test that theory out. So I should do that, because that would be a nice value add on top of this, and that would be enough justification for me to make that conversion. But behind the scenes, the way this works right now, I'm just running code, and so there's nothing there for PowerShell to figure out how these keywords are linked together.
So is this actually using the PowerShell dynamic keywords or not?
Oh yeah, it is. It is.
But it only defines them at parse time.
Yes. So no, it defines them when I.
Right. You're doing like management pack configuration is a command, just like.
Yeah. Well, so management pack. So the way these keywords work is interesting. You bring up a good point that I should jump to. So let me.
Sorry, I didn't mean to totally derail you. I'm just trying to understand.
No. This is good. I mean, well, right now it looks like we got a fairly small group on here, and so I don't mind any of these questions. And this goes for anybody in the chat room. If you have questions on any of this stuff, I kind of like one of the things I prefer about doing a session where I don't have a slide deck prepared is I don't necessarily have the whole thing scripted, and if somebody wants to go out and figure some of these things out, I can do that, and this is all relevant. So this is good stuff. So don't hesitate if you have questions. So the way these keywords work, let me show you this example. Down to how far? That's good, and all this stuff I want to comment out. I got a lot of experimentation stuff in here, so I'm just trying to comment a bunch of things out. So let me do that. So yeah, so look at this. So this is when I started experimenting for the very first time with dynamic keywords in this keyword experiments file. And so I defined this new keyword, right? Just call it keyword, and then I give it a name. So I'm going to call it exec test, and then I tell it it's going to have a script block that it's going to run, and that it doesn't. The keyword itself, when I invoke it, I don't have to give that instance a particular name. So that's what the no name flag here is for the name mode. So, but then I don't have any implementation details behind this, right? And it doesn't have any properties on the keyword either. And so then I need to go and define the properties that the keyword takes. So here's a new property, dynamic keyword property. Excuse me. I'm calling it script block. It's mandatory, although mandatory is not enforced. Part of this whole being half-baked thing. I still code it that way, but the mandatory portion is not enforced in the implementation right now. And then I add the property to a collection on my keyword object, and then I add the keyword to the keyword table. So that's the way this stuff works inside of PowerShell, right? So reset's basically the command that clears everything that's there already. And since this was my test script, I clear out all the stuff that's there from before, and then I create a keyword, and then I create properties on that keyword and add those to that keyword. And then after I've got that set up, then I add the keyword to the keyword table in memory. And once I've got that, I still have no implementation. I've got this keyword. And when I run it, what's it going to do? Well, you have to actually create a command. It doesn't have to be a function. It can actually be a command, but that doesn't matter. But you have to create a PowerShell command that has the same name as the keyword, and that's where the work is done. And you have to use a specific set of parameters behind that command. So you need to define in your param block, in this case, because it's a script block, this is the keyword parameter set. So I'll space this out so it's a bit easier to see. So it takes a keyword data, which is the actual keyword object itself. So when this is invoked, I get an instance of the keyword object in case I want to go and do something with that. The name, this is the name that I would get if a name was provided, if a name was required. So here, up top, you can see I specified no name. The other two options are name required and optional name. Ignore this simple name stuff because it doesn't work, it doesn't do anything, and behind the code, behind the scenes, it looks like it's not doing anything either. So just look at these top three. So the name is either required, optional, or the keyword doesn't have a name. So no name is required, so this is just going to be an empty string when my function is invoked, when the keyword is invoked, which invokes the function. The value, this is the actual script block that is defined by the person who types in exec test and then the curly brace, that script block, that's what it gives me. And then some metadata about the command that called it. And this is your invocation info. So you can figure out where it was invoked and what's going on in the system at the time. And so, yeah, so if I take this, which is just in a new module, and I run it, so yeah, do that, copy that, oops, and hang on, Butterfingers, wrong keystroke. So if I run that in here, then I end up with my KWT module, which is just a test module loaded, and it's got this exec test command that's exported. And if I run exec test, and I give it some script block, and the results I get back are, if you remember from me showing you the implementation, exec test, just for this test, all it returns are the parameters that were passed into it, so I could actually take a look at it. This is how I was experimenting with all this stuff in the very beginning, to try to figure out how these things work internally. And so there's the keyword metadata. If I look at that, that's the actual keyword object like I was talking about. And then the other ones, there's the value showing my script block. Foo is empty. Oh, and sorry, source metadata is not the actual, it's not invocation info technically. It is, but it isn't. It's a string that tells you where it was run. So it's run in ad hoc, so there's no script file, and line 1, character 6, and this is the command that was used, is exec test. So that's what that gives you, and they're all broken up by this double colon syntax. So why is all that relevant? So based on what you were just talking about, Joel, what you were asking questions about, this is the...
It seems to me like just what you have in lines 10 to 18 there, or 10 to 19 there, ought to be enough for them to figure out IntelliSense for parameters, because you're adding them to the keyword, right?
Yes. So let me do that then.
But if it's hash table mode, I guess, do you have to define what valid values are for the hash table, or is it just...
Well, the problem, you see this is showing you the problem, right? So function, because that is maybe part of the whole keyword thing being half-baked. I have to create a keyword, associate a command, which is a commandlet or a function. That commandlet or function has to have a very specific list of parameters.
Right.
And IntelliSense picks up on those.
Right.
But I'm not going to invoke it with those.
No, because it would break.
Yes. I invoke it using the actual parameters, which would be script block. Oh, I mean, I can do it without the dash script block. Actually, I don't know if this will actually work.
I was going to say it won't even accept it.
Right. Because I'm going to vote. Yeah, so
it cannot have a name.
Yeah, so it's a bit of a different beast, and so this is just part of. I mean, I wasn't using a name there. I thought that might work in that case because it was the parameter, and the parameter, I gave the parameter a name. So there still needs to be more work done, I think, on the internals for IntelliSense to work properly for this. And I don't know what the black magic.
Well, obviously something to prevent it from getting erased every.
Well, yeah. So, but I still don't. I still think there's a lot of value in this today, even in PowerShell version 4 without the IntelliSense, simply because if you compare, I mean, depending on the implementation details, right, and compare what you're doing. If you look at this management pack configuration document, which, I mean, aside from properties and build options, I'm doing a couple of interesting things here. This is kind of like a show UI version, this is like a, I'm creating UI here, right? So this is, when you create a management pack can have an associated administration settings property page. That property page has sections that are broken down by group called property groups, and then there's a bunch of properties on those, and those have labels and default values, maybe minimum maximum values, help messages for tooltips. So this whole section here is all about defining a set of properties that are going to show up in the UI inside of my SESM management console. And then down below that, I've got stuff showing that I want this, the way this works is this, this management pack declares a workflow that is run on a schedule, and the workflow is what does the automatic closure of the things that you need to have closed. And so the schedule is defined as daily at midnight, and I give it a start time and the days of the week mask, and then the workflow that's run, and so here I just give that a name and some metadata details, along with the trigger name, which pulls from my DSL here, the data schedule daily at midnight, and then the script block, and then I'm pulling from an external file, invoke autoclose work item.ps1. And so this, what this amounts to, by me providing this level of functionality today, and being able to create management packs this way, it solves a very big pain point, which is the scenario where all I want to do in Service Manager and this is only for Service Manager, but it could be converted fairly easily to Operations Manager because that also supports management packs. But all I want to do in Service Manager very commonly is add some workflow. And that workflow, I don't necessarily want to define it using Windows Workflow Foundation, and I don't necessarily want to define it using the SESM authoring tool because both of those are either too devy or have limitations in terms of how they work. But PowerShell opens up the scope to doing anything I want under the sun in terms of automation, and so I just want to run some PowerShell workflow. And so this allows me to do that, to take something that I create some workflow, and it's going to go and do something automation related with System Center, Service Manager, and I want it to run on a schedule, and I want that to be packaged in a management pack. So that's what this guy does, and I've got this MPC demo script, and so when I run that, which is just running this file, what it does, let me show you this folder first. So I've got this folder on my system called SCU demo. I demoed this first at System Center Universe. I run this DSL, and it doesn't show any progress, which it should, but I just haven't added that stuff to it yet. And so it creates this projects folder. And inside of that, it creates a folder for the management pack I'm creating. And inside of there, it creates a folder for the workflow, and the workflow is named. And there's a CS file containing all of this code. So I mean, that's just the metadata. That's not really useful. But if I go into the workflow, what's actually being run, that's actually pretty simple because it's mostly defined inside of XAML. But it goes and creates all of this XAML stuff that I don't want to have to deal with to go and run some PowerShell workflow. And it does it without creating any errors or doing any typos that are very easy to do when you're creating this sort of thing. And it also creates a management pack bundle, which consists of the management pack itself, which is built from this XML document, as well as the administration settings page. That's what this XAML CS file is. The pair right here, that's my admin UI dialog. Puts in the logo and sets up all the bits that it needs and the whole project file, and compiles it, and spits out at the end this release folder, which gives me my management pack bundle and a DLL. And that's it. And all of that is a heck of a lot of work to manually go through and do. But I just had to run some configuration document. And so my argument for these things, despite the fact that there is a lack of IntelliSense, and so yeah, you've got to be able to look at the actual language definition, which I'll show you in a second, to see how these things are defined. Fortunately, the conversion is actually fairly straightforward between the two. The value is that I can now define other management packs that do stuff that's very similar very, very easily. And technically, what I would like this to do, I would like to take this even further. I would like to have, because System Center Service Manager, the platform, is extensible, and because it can be used to manage various things that you want to manage, you might even want to manage your management packs. You might even want to manage this configuration document. So wouldn't it be neat if you had a management pack inside of Service Manager that stored these configurations, which puts them under some kind of a change process? And so if somebody needs a new feature, they go through and they raise a ticket that's against this particular management pack, which is stored in Service Manager. And then in Service Manager, you go and you update it, add a new version, and you republish it, which goes through the whole compile and build and automatically reload into your Service Manager platform. So it feeds itself just from working with this document. That's kind of where I would ultimately like this to go, or I think it makes a lot of sense. I mean, there's arguments for DSC going in Service Manager and companies that use that, and I've seen people do demos on that where they take desired state configuration documents and they put those inside of Service Manager, and then they can create problems or instance against those documents and manage those that way to put them through a change process, which then you could go and publish them out and run them in your environment. So I think that there's value add to that, despite the shortcomings of the functionality in the keyword syntax today. And if I go back and I want to look at what am I actually defining that's running that, and I talked about how since there's no IntelliSense, you need to kind of read the configuration. Well, I wanted to make that as easy as possible given the shortcomings of the feature. of this keyword feature. So I created this command that's part of LanguagePx called new-domain-specific language. And so I'm giving it a name. In this case, I'm just naming the same name as my module, which is SCSM MPC for management creation PX, and then the syntax for the language. And this kind of looks a lot like a C#, I guess. When you define your syntax for your entire document, or for your entire DSL, just by using a very declarative syntax itself that internally is parsed and used to create the keywords behind all this stuff. So I've got this master. The top level one is my master keyword that brings me into this language, so management pack configuration, and it accepts a name, and that name is required. If I had the name in square brackets, the name is optional. If I don't have a name, I just don't put it. So that's how I'm using it. I'm kind of trying to be as declarative as possible about this. So I've got a management pack configuration. It needs a name, and then all the details that I was showing in the other document, right? It has properties. These are what the properties are and their type. So you don't get IntelliSense, but you can look at this definition and see what I'm giving you, and then translate that into this, right? I don't think that the conversion, I mean, yes, there is a bit of looking back and forth at the logic to make sure you get everything right, but the, whoops, I didn't mean to do that. If I minimize, go back to where I was, the conversion between this and that is not too much of a mental hurdle. At least I don't think it is. Maybe it is for some other people. But this is all a work in progress, and that's something I want to kind of put out there and have people tinker with and see how it can be made better over time. So yeah, so I go through and define all of this stuff, and you'll see here some things inside of square brackets. Square brackets just means it's optional. That's just a syntax that I decided on to mark something as being not required. And so I define what these things all look like. There's some stuff that's commented out because it's kind of future planning on where I want to go with some of these things. And some of the stuff is not fully implemented behind the scenes. I want to use this to plug in SMA, which is service management automation, a little bit more tightly into SCSM, so that SCSM can be used to fire off SMA runbooks. And so this is just giving me that vehicle to do so I can just indicate that my workflow is going to run either a PowerShell script, which is stored in the management pack itself, or a script file that's external, or a runbook that's often some runbook server. So that's kind of where I'm going with it. And then when you do that and you run it, the logic, I mean, if you look at this, all I've defined here is syntax, but there's no code. Where's the code that defines all of this stuff? How does that all work? Because all of this stuff, as you pointed out, Joel, because all this stuff is just basically property bags, you're dealing with hash tables inside of hash tables, or hash tables inside of script blocks, and how that all works. All I'm really doing is nothing really fancy. I'm rolling it up inside of one big object that has nested properties. So I roll it up inside of this one object management pack configuration that actually is named using the name that you give it, and inside of that there is a properties property. And inside of the properties property you get these values: company, copyright, display name, and description and version. And then you can do what you want with that by defining the event handler. So the second command here, registered DSL keyword event, takes the DSL name using the same name and a path to the keyword that I'm giving an event for, and then the event type. And there's two types: onInvoked and onInvoking. And that's just, I'm trying to keep this that small at first and cover off a large number of use cases. OnInvoked basically means take this whole keyword definition, run it, and don't do anything until you get back the rolled up object. So on management pack configuration, once it's done invoking, I'm going to have back this PowerShell PS object with all these nested properties methods, and then I'm going to do something with it. And that's the onInvoke keyword. OnInvoking would be if, when I go into a particular keyword, when I go into management pack configuration, when I go into properties, I want it to do something at that point. And there's other use cases for that, like the Visio one. So I'll show you that one in just a moment. And so then, behind that, once aside from defining this DSL, Then I've got this keyword event. If I minimize, it's some 1142 lines of PowerShell script long, and that's not really doing all of the magic of creating XML documents, XAML documents, SAML documents, C# files, putting them in the right folders, doing the compilation, creating the management pack, assigning the management pack and the DLLs, creating the management pack bundle from those, packaging it all up, and putting it all in the appropriate folder for you when you're done. So that, of course, requires a heck of a lot of work. So this is not taking away from all of that. It's just abstracting it. And so you can create these DSLs to abstract from these more complicated tasks and do this work inside of a keyword syntax environment. And yeah, Joel, you're right that it could be done as commands, but I find that the keyword syntax I get at a minimum is very beneficial for being very declarative, and I also find that by leveraging keywords, I have found performance to be better, and I think that in terms of longevity, my options are going to be better going forward for what I can do with these things, especially if I get into converting them to abstract syntax trees. I'm having a hard time with that one tonight. Behind the scenes and doing that work to actually go through and run code. So so that's my SES MPC-PX module. And there's some other ones I've been kind of tinkering with. So I mentioned this Visio DSL I had a long time ago. And so let me page down here. I created this a long, long time ago, back PowerShell version 2, I think. And I was never totally happy with the implementation, and maybe that's why I find I'm preferring keywords over functions. I find the scope management of which commands are available and what scope easier in terms of how I've defined the language table under the covers inside of LanguagePx. I also find performance a little bit better, and so I had the syntax anyway, and this was actually working very well. And it's declarative, right? I want a new Visio document. I want a certain default page background. I wanted to use this theme with certain colors and effects on the theme. And then inside of that, I wanted to create a new document. And on that document, it's going to have a page. And Joel, maybe you can answer me a question. When you're working with your show UI stuff, do you end up having to use globals when you're working through the various scopes to actually store stuff and bubble it up at a higher level outside of
occasionally we have, I think we've mostly fixed that. Originally I was doing a lot of that, and although I think that I found most of the time you could set it at script level, meaning inside the module, because what show UI always does is that first outer command, Visio or whatever, takes a script block, and so the script block is then going to be invoked inside the module context.
Okay.
Which allows our code at least to use module, script variable, script scope. But what we did in order for bubbling stuff out, we provided a couple of helper things, and of course we have the benefit of everything that we're producing. All of our commands actually produce like a WPF control, and we use and abuse the tag property for passing stuff in and out.
Okay. So that was one of the limitations I was running into, is I found that I had to use global a lot. That's part of that. The fact that I was working with functions and scoping issues in modules, and that when you create a function that takes a script block and you run that script block, that runs in module scope, not in the scope where the function was invoked. And so that was part of my challenge with this that I didn't like. I didn't like that I had to use globals as much as I was using globals just to get the stuff to bubble up. I didn't have a tag property. I mean, maybe I could have found something as a workaround to do it, but it wasn't apparent to me. Also found performance was not quite what I wanted it to be, because I was defining a whole lot of functions inside of PowerShell. And the way this LanguagePx module works, it's a binary module, and I showed you.
Notice that I filed a bug. There's no source code.
Actually, there is. If you
Not
look
for the
in,
binary module.
what's that?
In your repo, there's no source code for the binary module.
Sure there is. So the way I structure all of my modules inside of CodePlex is on the master stream. I will put the module without any of the binary stuff because a lot of people don't care about that and they want to look at just the module itself. But if you want to get into the assembly and you want to look at that code, there's an assembly.
Oh, I see.
So all the modules I have on GitHub follow that model. You'll also find there's a release branch at some point once I officially sign this and have a signed version. So that's basically I use 3 branches. Master is considered experimental or latest unsigned. Release is the latest stable signed release, and assembly is all the binary bits. So going back to that, yeah. So it's a binary module, and so because it's a binary module, and because the way this works, because this new DSL, wait, wrong file. Yeah, because this new domain-specific language command is a actual compiled commandlet, and it defines all these keywords. The way these keywords work, I'm not just creating structure here for an object, but I'm also, of course, creating these keywords, and these keywords have to be commands. And so I was trying to figure out, well, how do I do that? How do I create all these commands so that it works and makes sense? And so I figured out that because they all have the same syntax, like I was showing you over here in this keyword experiments, right? Because they have all the same parameter signature, because they're all the same. They all take keyword data, script block, or hash table. So it's one of those two, depending on the body mode. Up here, if you define this as double colon hash table instead, then you have to make this guy be a hash table instead of a script block. So internally, I'm just using an object so I can cover both and then interpret it. But anyway, yeah, so I figured out that I could have one command that all keywords go through. And that command could be a compiled commandlet, which gives me good performance. It also, because it's a compiled commandlet, and if it's invoking a script block, it allows me to invoke that script block in the caller scope rather than in the module scope. Because when you have a compiled commandlet and you have a script block, you can invoke that where it was created. And so that was a big advantage to me in this architecture and this design to argue for going with keywords. So I have this, if you look at the commands in the module, let me flip over, if I do so there's only 3 commands that are exported from this module right now. There's new domain-specific language, remove domain-specific language, and invoke keyword. If you invoke keyword, it's going to tell you you can't invoke the keyword because you're not invoking the keyword from a keyword command. So it doesn't do anything, but I had to expose it as a public function or a public command because the keywords are being invoked outside the module scope, and so that was just to make it so they could actually work. They actually are all linked to this invoke keyword command, which then internally looks into the keyword table and says, what am I supposed to do with this? And the keyword table says, well, there's this keyword that isn't really loaded right now, but you need it, so here, I'll load it for you. And now this keyword has associated with it a script block and an event handler, and so you should go and run this. And so internally, it's got a couple of management utility classes that handle that job of dynamically putting this stuff together on the fly. And when you invoke these keywords, it knows, well, based on how you define the language, keywords have a scope, and so properties is available inside of the management pack configuration, and build options is available there, but build options is not available inside of admin settings. And so I'm going through and figuring out, based on the layout of the syntax that you define, where all these things fit together, what commands are available in what scope, and then I can tell you when you try to run something, oh, that's not available in the scope or not, or if it is, grab it, load it into the table, because it might not be there, because DSE might have blown it away, and run it. That's kind of how the magic is working under the covers. So, going back to my example of video, yeah, so I had this this was all basically, these were all just aliases. Visio was an alias for a function, so was default page background and whatnot document. And so it's just this syntax to allow me to create, I was using it to generate network architecture diagrams of virtual infrastructure inside of an ESX environment or a VMware environment. So you could draw out your topology on a vCenter server, and it would show you all the VMs and which resource folders they belonged under, and what clusters and what hosts they were associated with, and you'll get this nice diagram showing all this stuff. And so that's what this was actually created for. But then you could use it for doing Windows infrastructure diagrams or anything else really that you want to just generate a Visio diagram for. So this is kind of on my to-do list, to take this and convert this into a keyword. And this is a case where I care more about the option of, instead of on invoked, more about on invoking, because I don't want to generate all this stuff, which includes some commands to get items and all these things. This is more of a case where I want to kind of do it on the fly as I'm going through it. It's not just defining, like I did over here, it's not just defining some structure. Like, this is great, right? There's a couple different use cases behind a domain-specific language. You've got a modeling language, and you've got a markup language. Those are two very common use cases. A modeling language, which is this one, it's basically modeling what my thing that I'm creating looks like, right? You've got some, I want to model what my management pack looks like, and this is what I want it to use to define that management pack. And once I've got it modeled, I'll go and create it after the fact using an on-invoked event. Versus a markup language, that's more along the lines of, where'd it go? This one, where I want this stuff done on the fly, and I'm using the DSL to mark up my code to go through and do the magic and create it. So I've got this, so when this runs, the first thing it would do is create my Visio app. And then when this runs, it's going to go through and set that background. And when this runs, it's going to go through and set that theme. And when this runs, it'll create the first document. And then I'll be able to create the page, and I'll have the page handle. And so some of these things here that like I was doing before, where I store the page and stuff, that becomes less necessary, because internally I can manage that by using on invoking. So I create the page, and then right off the bat I can put the background on the page. And what that allows is that it allows me to dynamically generate the Visio document and show it to you as I'm doing it, which is a pretty cool effect. And there's some videos out there showing this done in the past, just using PowerShell script. But the script that you use to do it is just not that intuitive, and this is a lot easier to read. And so you could run this, and you would see Visio, and I can't show this to you yet because I haven't done the conversion, and I might be able to load up the functions and show it to you right now running it. But I want to keep on going and see if I got time to get back to that. So yeah, it's pretty cool that you can run this and actually see the diagram being drawn right in front of you from your PowerShell script that creates and pulls up this infrastructure diagram. So that's what I'm shooting for. And it does it just using the COM API for Visio, which is slow, although they get much faster in PowerShell version 5 and later, because they've really improved the COM performance in that version. So yeah, so I want to go in through and so this is kind of my DSL. I mean, I actually don't even need this type markup. That was me just mocking up what this could look like. You don't need to define if it's a markup type or not anymore, because I went with a model more where you define your DSL, and so this is defining the syntax and what's optional versus what's not, and then at the end you declare your event handler for it. And the event handler is how you define if it's markup or not, because are you doing it in an on-invoking for a keyword, or are you doing it in an on-invoked after the keyword has actually got ran and given you back this object, and that allows you to do that that work that you need to do. So I want to show an example. This is not scripted, and it could go wrong, but I'm going to try doing it anyway. This is a simple example, and it's kind of neat because it shows off something that Doug Fink just pushed out a couple of days ago. I don't know if you guys have seen this yet or not, but Doug Fink just created this module called Import Excel, and it's using this DLL called Excel something or other. I forget what it's called, but anyway, it uses a DLL. It's just a class library that lets you work with Excel and generate Excel documents, even if you don't have Excel on your system. But if you do have Excel on your system, then of course you can open up those documents and look at them. And so it basically is just wrapping the Office API XML, the Office XML documents, and using it to generate the Excel document that actually contains your content. And so I've got the module on my system here. And when I run this, so I'll show you the whole command here while it's running. Export Excel, path, I give it a path to my Excel file. I use -force because I wanted to overwrite. -show because I wanted to show Excel when it's done. Which you can see Excel just pop up here in my window. I'll show it to you in a second. And then a couple of other things. I wanted to auto-fit my columns, so I want them auto-sized so I can see all of the data. I want to include a pivot table and a pivot chart. Doug's module, by the way, is also experimental, so he's still working out some of the syntax on this stuff. He's taking feedback on it right now, and his project is on GitHub as well. I should show that to you. Where is... So if you go to GitHub, the Think, yeah, import Excel. So he's got this cool module up there, and let me put that in the chat room. If somebody wants to go and grab it. Where did the chat window go? There's the link for that module. And so I ran that. And so there it is, EP+. That's the name of the DLL that he's using. And the module is actually really, really simple, hardly any code in it at all, just a couple of PowerShell functions. And so, yeah, so I'm indicating I want to include a pivot table, including a chart, what rows I wanted to pivot on. I wanted to pivot on the name property, and the pivot data I want to see in my table is the working set 64 or the memory size. And so it runs and it creates this Excel doc. And here's my Excel doc. And I didn't have to go through and create this myself. It just ran and did it. And so it's got two sheets here. On the first sheet, I've got the output from getProcess that I piped into it. All the properties, and they're auto-sized because I used that -size columns. Let me, again, scroll this in here. So here I can see the list of properties, the handles, memory size, all the stuff that you see from your getProcess command output. And not just what you see as default, but all the properties are here. So file versions, company names, descriptions, and it goes on and on and on because there's a ton of properties on your process objects. But it gets into the interesting ones that I wanted to know about, such as working set 64, which is the memory. So all the way over here, I can look at the memory for my individual processes right here. But that's a per process thing, and I want to see, well, which of my applications that I'm running are consuming all of my memory. And you don't have to look very hard to guess which one I have that's consuming all my memory. If you know anything about me, I tend to keep a lot of tabs open in Chrome because I look at a heck of a lot of documents at once, and day to day I'm always getting pulled from one thing to another, and so I keep them open and around. And I know there's tools out there that I don't have to do that, but I do it anyway. And so I have these Chrome processes running, and that's what's going to be the big hit here. And so my pivot table gives me a roll-up of all the processes that are running by name, and then what's the sum of the aggregate value of the working set 64. And then here's a breakdown of those processes in a chart. And as you can see here, when I hover over my, actually, wait, let me zoom in here as well. So if I go to my chart and I hover over it, well, the intelligence is awfully small, but that shows that it's Chrome using 48% of the total memory being used on my system right now because I have all those tabs open. So that's kind of cool because it's Excel document creation. And whenever I start thinking about document creation, I mean, that's my most common mental use case for where I think DSLs have a good amount of play right now. I mean, that's what you're doing with desired state configuration, right? With desired state configuration, you're defining MOF documents behind the scenes, and those MOF documents are being used to push the configuration on a system. In my management pack configuration, you're defining all of the documents, all of the XAML, XAML, C# files, which then are used to create DLLs, which then are used to create management pack bundles, and all of that stuff that's behind the systems. So it's usually about document creation that I start thinking about DSLs. And so I thought it'd be fun to go through this example because it's actually a fairly simple one, and show how I could define a DSL for this one on the fly. And so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this command and switch it to splatting. So params equals, so it's going to contain a bunch of parameters, and I'm going to copy that out. And so let me, so I've got a bunch of parameters. And like I said, I haven't actually done this yet, so this may not work. This is all experimental, but we'll see. So I'm going to define these values, and I want to set this equal to the path, and force is equal to true, and show is equal to true, and that equals true, and this is all equals to true. There's a heck of a lot of switch variables. True. This is equal to a name, and this is equal to property that I want to set. So this is the same set of properties I'm running, just in a more readable format, and then I can splat that in as params. And so yeah, so this is my where my document's going to be created. That says overwrite. That says show it when it's done. That says auto fit the property values in the table. I want a table and a chart on a pivot table on the second page, and the properties I want to create. And so I can run this, and it's going to do the exact same thing that I just did. So if I copy that, and I'm going to close out Excel, don't save, and just F8. So I'll run that and flip back. And so that's doing the same thing. But wouldn't it be neat if I could define that in a DSL? Because you can imagine, when you're dealing with Excel document creation, just the same as when you're dealing with any document creation, whether it's dealing with Visio or Word, there are a lot of things you can do. And so do you want a lot of parameters, more and more parameters defining what those things are that you can do, which makes a very complex, maybe unwieldy command? Or do you want to start defining a bunch of nested parameters or nested commands and how those run? And so what if I wanted to do domain-specific language? Let's say new domain-specific language, and that's interesting. And I'm going to call it Excel PX, and let's define what that looks like. And so let's say that that's going to have inside of it a, well, let's cheat a little bit. I'm going to go back to here, and I'm going to steal a few things. So, yeah, copy that out. So I'm creating this new language. I give it a name so I can actually remove it if I want to. I'm going to call this Excel doc magic, and the name of the document, which maybe I'll treat that actually as the path, but I have to use name in the syntax because it's defining that it takes a name. And I want to give it a couple of properties. So let's say I want to have Boolean, and I want to do overwrite and Boolean show. So you get the idea of what I'm trying to do here, right? I mean, this is the translation, showing you how you can convert between something, one another. Auto fit. Actually, this is auto size. Be more consistent with format table. And so I'm going to leave include pivot table and chart and make those be implicit just for the fun of it. And now let's go ahead and set another couple of things. So let's say I want to do, actually let's do it this way. I want to include pivot data, and in that pivot data, that's going to allow me to create a second tab, and I'll define a string that contains the row property name, any string that contains the row aggregate value. So that pretty much contains everything else that I had up above. I don't have to show a chart. Chart's more of an optional thing, so I'll put that up here as a boolean as well. Chart include. So this is like very, very rough and off the cuff. I haven't defined this before. No tricks up my sleeve. And so if I wanted to define that, that defines this language, right? And if I run that, of course I get an error. Magic. Hang on a second. If I flip back to dash name, dash syntax, curly brace.
Maybe you should have let it tab complete with the module name in it.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be the module name, but I think I need dash name. I'll do that. Dash syntax. Let's see. Like I said, this stuff is experimental. There we go. So that's what it was. It wasn't like in my parameter, so I've got some positional parameter issues in my definition right now, but that's not a big deal. So now that I've done that, what's interesting, now let me show you something here. If I go to System Management Automation, Language, I'm at keyword, and I'm going to call get keyword to show me all the keywords that are defined. And so here you can see I've got exec test from the one I ran earlier. Whoops. So I've got exec test defined as a keyword in my table. This only exists not blown away because I haven't run any configuration commands. And I've got Excel doc magic that I created, which contains this script block. And you only see those two. You don't see, this is intentional, you don't see the other ones here. You don't see this properties keyword, and you don't see this pivot data keyword because they're scoped. They only exist inside of here. So like I mentioned earlier, I'm creating them, and I'm storing them in my own table, which has the metadata necessary to relate a parent keyword to a child keyword, and that way I can pull them up on the fly. So those keywords don't exist. And what's fun about that is that actually works well because now I can have properties defined here, or I can have properties defined in another DSL, and it doesn't matter because the current implementation, this is another annoyance or limitation of the dynamic keyword stuff, the current implementation of this is one keyword rules it all. They're all done by name, not by GUID or anything like that. So if you create a new keyword that is the same as an existing dynamic keyword, then it overwrites and you lose the magic. So this works around that, this new DSL stuff. So I've created it, and then I want to go and I want to do an implementation of it. So now I want to go and define a add DSL have completion. So add new DSL. What did I call it? Register, right. If you're dealing with events, you need to register them. So, register dash DSL keyword event, and that's interesting. I don't know about you, I often have issues with tab completion with IntelliSense inside of ISE. I don't know what that is. Anyway, DSL name Excel PX. Working now? No. So I've got a challenge with my current environment. Keyword path, the event, and the action. So the keyword path is easy. So when Excel doc magic is run, back and forth again. The event is going to be uninvoked again, because in this case I'm defining the whole thing as one document that now I can just work with a rollup when I'm done, and the action. And I'm just going to, for the action for now, Yeah, this is a script block. By the way, action doesn't have to have any parameters. So in the script block, I'm going to just set a global value first to show what this looks like. Contents. And that's going to equal, oh, by the way, when you're working with this stuff inside of the actual configuration document, or inside the event handlers, it gives you the object using $underbar. So I'm just going to assign that to $underbar and finish. So this isn't actually going to do anything really interesting right now. I can register that, and why is that? Oh, I just made it. I know why that is. And why am I? One moment. Yeah, I know what that is. I just before this call renamed one moment. I just renamed a command just before this call, which I should know better than that. LanguagePx, language in debug, copy the DLL to modules. Oh, of course, because I loaded it once. It is stuck in the current session. So hold that thought for 1 second. I'm just going to copy this. I'm going to come over to my other environment. Okay, and now, yeah, so see how register DS, yeah, so it's not recognizing the command because this test environment should probably just have register keyword event. So I've got a very quick update to do after this session with my module. So I run that. Dang it. Uninvoked. That's a typo on my part. And this should technically be event name. So now I can run that. So there I've registered my event. Now, yeah, I want to show you this. Now when I go back to it and I run Excel doc magic, and let's say I'm going to call this, well, it doesn't matter what I call it, so my Excel test. No, actually, yes, I'm just going to do path for that one, so let's do it that way. // users /. So there's my document path, and then I wanted to have inside of that a bunch of properties, and I'll do overwrite true, show true, auto size true, and include Kirk is true, and then pivot data. And for that, I will do row property equals, that's going to be the name of the process and row. So when I do this, so this is my implementation of the, or my, yeah, okay, this is my actually invoking this command, and so I'm going to run that. And now if I look at the global contents, so you see how it has properties, and so this is if you're going to do your own implementation of one of these things. And inside of properties, I can see I've got all those values I set. And inside of pivot data, I've got the values I set there. So that's kind of how that works, right? Does that make sense? So this $enter bar includes, because it's an on-invoked action, includes every property I've got from this entire thing, because I'm doing it on the Excel doc magic command. And so, of course, once I have those properties, my implementation here can change to that command I had. So let me go back. So this, copy that, back over to virtual machine. Oh, wait, wrong one. There. And all I need to do in here is substitution. So here I can put in $underbar dot name, because I want the name of the actual document. And let me just check something. Excel doc magic, there's the name. And yeah, there's name property. So it's so name property is showing me my path. That's hidden. I forget why, but when you assign a name, it's available to you internally.
Because it's a hash table.
Pardon me?
It's hidden because your content
that's
is a
right.
hash table
Yeah.
or dictionary object.
That's right. So I've added some properties to it. So when you go through, thank you. So when you go through and you define these guys, and it gives you back this hash table object, whatever you specify here as the name is stored in a name property, and whatever is go back to the output, the keyword that actually is used is stored and produced by keyword, so you can tell where things come from. So yeah, so I just need to come in here and do a bunch of magic to convert from one to another. So $underbar.name, $underbar dot properties, and this would be overwrite. Same idea here, underbar properties dot show auto fit, auto size. So you get the idea. This is going to be set to I'm automatically including a pivot table because I'm using pivot data. So in this case, it's $underbar dot contains key. So I'm going to flip back over here. I want to see if something is contained in it, right? So I want to do contents dot contains properties, or pivot data in this case.
Funny, I just learned the other day that contains is the one that's universal, not contains key.
Yeah, that's annoying. Yeah, if you're using ordered dictionaries, you don't get contains key. So I tend to use -contains a fair amount as well when I'm doing comparisons of things too. But let's all do $keys -contains as an option. So where was it? Right. So this includes pivot data. So if that's true, then it's going to use a pivot table and $underbar dot properties dot include chart. And then the last two down here are designed $underbar dot pivot data dot row prop and $underbar row aggregate. So by defining all this stuff, I'm getting the same functionality, and then so that's my params going into my command. So I could have this, so you can do whatever you need to behind the scenes, right? Here I'm mapping a DSL to an existing command, so it's going to go through and do the work I want it to do. I'm not going to set show.
Are you not gonna have trouble with your Boolean properties and switches?
No. No, I've tested Booleans. They work just fine.
So what I mean, like if line 33 is missing, what?
If I take that out?
Yeah. Well, I'm just asking because show would be null then, right? In your params hash table.
Yeah. So if I'm here, if I do, let's say I'm not going to show it, right?
So leave it there in your definition of your method. But if you just leave it out of your properties table, what happens?
Oh, well then I'll get an error up here because I'm not. I mean, up here, show doesn't exist as a property, or I'll get null, and the command may or may not.
Right.
Yeah. So in that case, I might want to more explicitly just do this here, right? So then a null value, if it's not set, then
Yeah.
I'm good to go. So I could do bool for all those guys. And so I'm not going to actually show. I don't have Excel installed on this VM, so I'm going to just remove that so I don't call show. And I also need to very quickly copy over the actual module that does that work because I don't have it on that VM. So copy, come to my VM, go to documents, just PowerShell, modules, paste. There's import Excel. And so this should respect the fact that it's not opened and just run. And so I'm going to, because I don't want to muck around with my current session, I'm going to flip over to a clean PowerShell prompt here. And I'm going to paste this in. So this should realistically generate the document and not show it if Doug's module is working the way it's advertised and not actually requiring Excel on my system. And so when I run Excel Doc Magic here, crossing my fingers, so it ran. That's great. And if I go to yeah. So it creates the document. So the other thing I'm not doing here is opening it because I don't have Excel on this system, and I could run this on my main system and make this work. But I just need to make one correction because I renamed that register keyword event as register DSL keyword event. So if you downloaded my module from GitHub already, since I linked to it earlier, then just get a new one. Either, well, I'm going to go eat supper first because I'm hungry, but after that, then I can come back and post the update later this evening, which will have the new DLL and a properly named command being exported from the module.
Very cool. Hey, I actually want to go back to that question I had earlier, and because I've been thinking about it, and I think that I was wrong. You have Boolean defined on line 5. You have show defined as a Boolean on line 5, right?
Right.
If you don't define it in your properties down on line 32, what happens? If you just delete that.
Sure. So I was going to comment that out. So
is it mandatory?
Well, so it should be. Because up here, I didn't define it like this.
Okay.
Right? So technically, I am defining the keyword the right way. I'm setting the mandatory property, but the keyword infrastructure is not honoring that.
It doesn't work.
So in this case, where that's defined the way it is right now, I'm going to run this again. Let me just go back. Let me do again settings global. Global settings equals $underbar and comment out the rest of this stuff. So by me doing this, that's what you're asking, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So copy that, and I'm going to exit out of here and go into a new PowerShell session, so I don't feel like mucking around with environmental stuff, and rerun that. So now settings, properties. Yeah, so it's just not there.
Right.
So that's a shortcoming, because technically, the way this should work, and the way I'm hoping that they'll get this to work once Jason has priority bubbles up enough to actually fix this, then that when I ran this command, it should raise an error saying show is required on properties.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was wondering, because I was just playing with it without your module, just writing it by hand. And the mandatory didn't seem to work, and I thought, well, what if I put mandatory on the parameter for the function?
I've tried that too, yeah.
And that doesn't, it actually doesn't, you can't, it doesn't pass in the properties to the function, it just passes in the hash table to value.
Yeah.
So you would have to actually, I don't know, throw something when you look at the value that's passed in and throw something, but that would presumably not work.
Right.
Meaning, I can't imagine what you could throw to get it to come out right.
Well, I sort of can, because I know that when you're dealing with, when you create an advanced function and you do commandlet binding, or you create a binary commandlet, either case, the actual PS commandlet object that you get access to has, you get access to a get resource string method, which allows you to go and pull the very same resource strings, the very same ones that they use when you're missing something that's required. So like if you run a command that doesn't have a required parameter and it should raise an error or prompt you or whatever, or has something missing, you can actually.
It wouldn't end up. It wouldn't. It would. The desired effect is for it to be a syntax error, not a runtime error.
Oh yeah, I know what you're saying. Yeah. I might get that if I switched to using AST stuff. Yeah, I might be able to figure out a way to make that happen in an AST implementation. Because I think the original intent behind this was AST, but then talking to Jason, he said, but what if people create some AST that just doesn't make sense? And because ASTs, it's definitely, it takes a bit of work to get your head around.
Yeah, I would consider that a huge barrier to actually using it.
Yeah. So I'm trying to, I wanted to kind of boil it down to, that's why I took this approach. I wanted to boil it down to, give me my syntax, give me the implementation details, and let the end user just run it. And who cares about AST? So yeah, so it's not giving me all of the niceties that I get from IntelliSense, and I don't know if I could figure out some way to make it do that based on hooking into the IntelliSense extensibility inside of PowerShell or not.
Well, it doesn't. Yeah, as far as I can tell, it is completely ignoring it in. So when I added one, like the example thing that you showed earlier, that your where you had a whole bunch of script things.
Oh yeah, you did.
I was playing around with. No, I mean.
The stuff?
Yeah, that stuff. I was playing around with that, trying to see, and yeah, it looks like if I create a keyword and I say the name is mandatory, and then I run all the code so that keyword is defined and everything's great. When I write that keyword in script, it fails when I try to invoke it, but ISC does not show a syntax error in the editor.
Yes. Yeah.
So it knows that it says, when you try to run it, it says, oh, a required name or expression is missing, and it looks like a syntax error, but ISC isn't interpreting it, even though it obviously actually is a syntax error.
Yeah.
So there's something more than just these keywords that they are doing magic behind the scenes to make DSC work.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
which
so
is
there's,
which is obviously explicit to DSC.
yeah. So it's missing some glue, something
Yeah,
that
well,
allows.
and that's why they're not willing to talk about it, right?
Right.
Because it's so broken
Yeah.
that the feature, if we start using this, we'll write lots of bugs, and they're trying to avoid that.
Yeah, so that was also part of my own argument for abstracting away from it, because the fact that you're using this stuff behind the scenes, I don't care. Like the general person doesn't have to think about it, right? I
Right.
mean, that's why I was even before we came in on this talk, I was wondering, do I even start talking about some of this stuff? Because if it's so intricate and you have to know so many technical details about how the stuff works, and you can't really use it without the proper framework in place, and I already have the kind of the management piece in place to manage this stuff, then really who cares, right? But it is good to know what some of the limitations are. It's also good because if anybody wants to kind of talk about where this could go, where they'd like to see this go, understanding some of the technical details of what you can do behind the scenes is useful. I mean, I've gone through I've got this document here that's just a bunch of comments right now, but it's basically, this is breaking down what each of the properties on a keyword is used for, how the values work, what's DSC only versus what's not. What kind of things can you do? Because there's even, you can define some functions on a keyword internally, which is different from defining, it's that different from associating a keyword with a command. You can have, it's almost like, well, yeah, you're just defining a delegate, really, right? So you can create a delegate function that is what's invoked when the keyword is run, and that is for translation of a keyword into an AST. And I'm not doing that, so I haven't dug into it, but it's there, right? So there's lots of different things. And so I kind of made this big list of notes, and I gave feedback to Jason already, saying, it doesn't have to be this complicated. That I tried to sell him on the idea that it could look a heck of a lot more like this stuff.
Right. Yeah. In your keyword experiments, what do you do to register the function to the keyword?
Oh,
Just have to have the same name.
Yeah, just same name. That's it. So the keyword, if the keyword is loaded in the keyword table, so when I ran earlier, system management automation language dynamic keyword get keyword, it gives me all the keywords. That's the keyword table of what's currently loaded. If there's a keyword in that table that has a name that matches a function or a command on your system, and that function or command has the right syntax, then the magic happens. So what I'm doing, because people can create functions of whatever name they want to, and I don't really want to conflict or muck around with that, what I'm doing is I'm using aliases. Because I personally feel keywords should be really one level higher than aliases even, because it's a keyword, right? If you can't create an alias for class, or an alias for if, or an alias for each.
Right.
Right? Because those are keywords. And so they're even one level higher in terms of priority than what aliases are. But I can't, there's no keyword, right? I can't say this is a keyword. And I'm saying it's a dynamic keyword, but I can't then go through and create my command and say this is the implementation details, and it should be run at that higher level. So I'm using aliases so when I create these, when I take the keywords from my internal table and load them into the dynamic keyword table, I also create aliases to map those names to my invoke keyword commandlet. And that's how the magic happens behind the scenes. And that's how I make sure that I'm not, even if there is another function with that same name outside of the scope, it doesn't matter. Aside from, you could obviously get a scope conflict, at the top level stuff. So if something named Excel doc magic exists, I'm obviously going to have a conflict there because this is a top level entry point. But properties, which is very generic, and pivot data or whatever else I put inside of here, that's all internal implementation details, and those details I even needed to make sure have a higher precedence than somebody having created a properties function or a pivot table, or pivot data function, or command even. So I'm using aliases internally for that, where I do the associations and then remove them when I'm done.
Makes sense.
A lot of hand waving and magic stuff that happens behind the scenes to try to tie this together and give it the illusion of working with keywords at a higher level and doing the right thing at the right time. But I'm actually really happy with the end results because I find it works quite well. And I mean, the fact that I can go through and define this on the fly, this makes a lot of sense to me. Because I know with Excel, as soon as Doug went and pushed this, he starts getting a request for, oh, that's great. Now can you take in multiple data sets and multiple pages on my Excel document, and on this one I want a chart, and on that one I want a pivot table, and so it starts getting complicated, right?
Yep.
Much more complicated than the scope of a single export Excel function. So this allows you to make that complicated stuff happen without it being complicated for the end user using the stuff, hopefully. Because hopefully this stuff, I mean, hopefully this looks a little bit easier than the similar thing might look, you know, if you're dealing with having a document and then inside of that page or tab or whatever, tab for Excel.
One of the things I like about it is that one of the things I like about it is what happens when you start talking about parameter sets is the exclusivity here is very clear.
Mm-hmm.
Like that pivot data, for instance, essentially ends up being a parameter set.
Yes.
That you could have similar things defined however you wanted to, and say this is blocks that you need or you don't need or whatever.
Right. Oh, and I should mention too, when you're defining these things, I mean, pivot data right now, this is atomic, right? So if I define it, and I if I was to do that again, and I could try that.
It'll cry.
I'm not sure if it'll cry or if it'll just overwrite. I think it's just going to overwrite the first one with the second one, and that might be. Let me just try it and see. Roll the dice. So copy the whole thing. PowerShell session. So run all of that. Okay, yeah, so I am checking it. I thought I added that. Yeah. So it's already been added. But if, let's say it was something along the lines of, let's say I was dealing with documents and pages, right, or tabs, right? So I can have document, my doc, that's what I'll call it, dot xlsx. Yeah, I mean, I could have put this, this could be, you know, Excel at the top, and the document, you know, not named, and the document name actually comes in at this level. And then underneath that level, I could have page. And when I'm dealing with name things, then when I'm working inside of my event handler, and I'm dealing with $underbar or whatever I store that as in Access, then instead of doing $underbar dot pivot data, let's say pivot data had a name, I would put the name, right? So I've made it smart enough that if up here in my definition I do this, that means I can have multiple, and because I can have multiple, then the property itself is not going to be stored as pivot data. The property is going to be stored as the named instance.
Makes sense.
Make sense?
Yep.
Yeah. So, yeah, so that's where I am with that. This is actually fun to share this with people who are in the PowerShell space. When I shared this at SCU, I had some people very few people who were kind of at this level in PowerShell. But being able to share this with somebody who kind of sees how this works with PowerShell and the kind of value that's there is a lot of fun. So what I need to do with this now is it's up on GitHub, but broken because I got the wrong DLL, so I'm just going to repub that, and then you can download it and use it. And like I mentioned, that'll be after my supper. And then feedback, please share it. What I'll do with this particular example is I'll copy this and put that on GitHub as an example document that if you want to look at it and see how I'm doing it or how I define this, that way I can share it with people. And then experiment and let me know what you figure out. Let me know what you'd like to try with it. Don't be afraid to pull me in because this is still in the experimental phase, and I'm happy to help people figure this stuff out because it'll help me make the module better. And I mean, I can see this being applied in a lot of spaces. We had a discussion, or there's an ongoing discussion about where PowerShell fits into the developer world. And one big thing I always turn to for developers with PowerShell is extensions and how complex those extensions are by the nature of needing to be for creating rich product, but for the smaller, simpler, low-hanging fruit extensions that give high value to customers that could be defined by somebody who's not a coder, this is a great alternative. And so I'd love to see this sort of thing be considered because I think it would bring a lot of solve a lot of problems that customers have. And because it's PowerShell, I mean, for me, I love it because I don't have to create tooling around it to give me a drag and drop UI, and I can just write the syntax in an easy to read format that makes sense to me and deal with it that way.
Cool.
Oh, I just saw the comment about the project's PS drive. Yeah, I use named PS drives a lot, and it's a huge time saver, and it just makes me, because I've got, under my documents folder, I've got a projects folder where I put my binary modules, and under Windows PowerShell, I've got modules, and so I've got my PS drives set up so that I can go to my documents folder really easy, or I can go to PowerShell root, or I can go to modules, or I can go into my projects, and so that makes me deal with agile management of my modules a lot easier, because my process for publication of these things, once I add changes to them, is only semi-automatic right now. And I'm actually really looking forward to next month's PowerShell Virtual User Group, because it's about some of the stuff that I do, dealing with GitHub and PowerShell modules, and how do you get a pipeline that makes sense for pushing stuff to GitHub and then pushing it up into the cloud for PowerShell Get into the gallery. And so these.
Yeah, I think we need to poke Sergey about the getting that last step as part of his presentation.
The PowerShell gallery piece.
Yeah, pushing it out, because it looked to me like he's talking about definitely automated builds and continuous integration stuff, but I'm not sure that it goes as far as, you know, setting up a gate where you would say, okay, now push it to the gallery.
Yeah. Oh, there was another comment. So anyway, that's why I use these paths, because it just makes my work much easier as I'm jumping around back and forth. I don't have to think about where they are on a given system. Somebody asked earlier how I removed a bunch of dashes and stuff. In ISE, if you hold Alt and then you press Shift and then arrow up, that does a selection across a bunch of lines, and at that point I can start typing or removing characters. And so that makes it very easy to do block comments, instead of having to go to the top and do this and come to the bottom and do that, and did I do it in the right spot and all that nonsense. I find block comments are much easier just by Alt, Shift, arrow keys, and then hitting the hash key. And then
if you were using a real editor, it would have a hotkey for them. I mean,
yeah. So yeah, there are other editors that do this better.
Actually, the steroids fixes that too.
Okay. Anyway, that answers that question that was in the comments or in the chat window. So that's what I got. Thank you guys for listening. Have a great Easter weekend and long weekend. If you have any questions, I can stick around. I'm happy to answer them. If you just want to go and experiment with this and come back maybe with stuff after you tinker with it, I'm fine with that too.
Excellent. Thank you.
My pleasure.
I should also add, for anybody who watches this on YouTube later, the event for next month is Sergey will be presenting. He's one of the developers on the PowerShell team. He will be presenting about deployment and how to work, basically how to create modules using GitHub and Pester for automated testing, and what's the one he likes? AppFair for continuous integration. So that should be a good one. Hopefully it'll be May 7th, and hopefully you'll all be able to join us.
I didn't know he was on the PowerShell team. That's cool.
Yeah. Oh, didn't you meet him at the summit?
I probably did. I just didn't make the connection.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, actually, you know what's funny is I didn't get what his role was when I met him. And I wasn't sure if he was like QA guy, like what James Brundage used to do, or if he was a developer. But
Okay.
anyway, he is a he has he made. I figured it out by checking out his Twitter profile. True story.
Cool.
And now he's no longer he's no longer patient about dev tools. He is now passionate about them. That's a you have to check Twitter for that. His Twitter profile said he's patient about dev tools and dev experience. And when I copied it into the virtual user group thing for next month, I tweeted him and said, "Did you mean patient or did you mean passionate? Because patient about the dev experience makes no sense to me."
Well, depends on what tools you're using.
But yes, I'm not saying that you don't have to be patient. It just doesn't seem like something you would brag about.
Yeah.
And so he said, "Oh, I'm sorry, my English," and changed it. Anyway, so he will be speaking next month.
Cool.
And hopefully, that will be awesome. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that one too because I spent a lot of time doing that stuff myself.
Yeah.
Trying to push this stuff out. So.
I think you're in the same spot as I am, where it's like I should use Pester more.
Yeah. I'm just afraid of that because starting that path probably means that I'm going to find stuff that I'm going to want to change in it. I've got so many.
That's what happened to me, right?
Yeah.
I started playing with. I started. Well, originally I wrote my own before Pester was big, and when I decided I needed to do some test first stuff recently, I went back and looked at mine and looked at Pester, and I said, you know what, I should use the one that everybody's using instead of doing my own little thing. But as soon as I did it, I decided I needed my Gherkin stuff, and so I went and added all that.
Yeah.
Anyway. All right. Thank you.
Thanks, Joel. Thanks, everyone, for attending.